Good afternoon. You're watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Sunday around 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, July 7th, 2024. We're continuing our playthrough of the Murano Man from Dear Holmes. Let's check in with the chat, see how everyone's doing. YouTube says 13 concurrent viewers, 2 likes. I do appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up. I want to say thank you to Nelson Weissman, who's joining us, who became a member of the Patreon this weekend. All of the games we play on this channel have been purchased by me with help from the Patreon. Keeps us independent, keeps us from feeling bad if we say we don't like a game. Overall, just a wonderful feeling. Don't feel compelled to join the Patreon, but if you can afford it, I very much appreciate it. All right, so we're on letter 2 of the Murano Man. Before we do a recap, let's just catch up with some bookkeeping. On Thursday and Friday, in 2 sessions, we played that tiny little box you see over there called Guilty. It's a brand new series. This is the first box, subtitled Houston 2015. Took us actually 2 sessions, maybe 10 hours or so, 9 or 10 hours to play. It was a very interesting experience, a serious game, rated 18 and up, with some new ideas, new attempts. We did solve it, but we also had some criticism, but very much looking forward to more cases. You could check out those playthroughs, but also if you follow the link to Board Game Geek, there's a thread that the author, the writer, and the producer of the game have been replying to, which is interesting. Always interesting when we hear from the writer of the game. Usually it's a good, usually it's a positive experience. Surprisingly, really, I fear that more authors would be concerned about playthroughs of mystery games and feel like, well, why will people buy it if they can watch a playthrough? But I guess everyone knows people would rather play it themselves than watch a playthrough. It's a very tiny group of people that I have the pleasure of interacting with that have the personality that you can join me for these live streams or watch them. All right, Marlene is here, Marco is here, Rob is here, Dee is here. All right, so let's do a little bit of recap. In our first letter, we heard about a spy, basically. A spy from the Italian embassy who's been killed working undercover. And we're not told immediately that it's a spy, but that's what becomes clear. And we're asked to find out what are the circumstances of Signor Breccia's demise, who did it and why, and is the crime related to the work he was carrying out for the government, his spy work? Or is there something else that motivated his killing? So I did reread this. I do want to point out it is interesting how we're framed it like we've got this letter calling us to investigate this case, and Watson says he recognizes the letter is clearly from the Italian ambassador. But it's not like, it's like leaving a tiniest little window that it might not be, but I think everything seems to suggest it is. Okay, and then we get Watson's retelling of how he visited the scene of the crime. So he goes and meets with this guy, Frosali, who's an agent of the Italian ambassador, who's a friend of Holmes. And we get brought into Clerkenwell into a side door to the Phoenix Brass Foundry, which is a foundry where they melt things down and stuff and create stuff, maybe metalwork and glass and other stuff. But we're led into this guy's glass blowing shop, which is adjacent to and connected to the Phoenix Brass Foundry. No more is made of this, but we know that the logo on the foundry's door seems to suggest it's involved in military. It's a military foundry, so it's possible that that has some relevance to us. The shop window is splashed with red paint. No further mention of that, but someone is angry, perhaps, at them. And we find the body in the dark. The body is at the workbench. And we're told a little bit about our guy, Alfonso Breccia. 30 years ago, used to be handsome, is now all beat up and bruised. Killed with a blow to the back of the head. Some odd items on the workbench. In addition to the glass blowing stuff, he's got tuning forks for musical notes. There's some question about what kind of piece of glass you'd be building that you would need that for. A giant pair of bloody shears, and 2 of his fingers are missing. Seems to us like this is classical torturing of a spy to get him to give up information. Oddly, under his workbench are 2 wooden cases that used to contain wine or for holding wine, and they've got the wine sellers' names on them. It's pointed out there is some weird, unusual tubular glass that's particularly delicate. I surmised that what could be happening here is our spy could be blowing these tiny, thin tubes airtight, putting a message in them, sealing them up, putting them in the wine, or perhaps sending drugs or something else. But that was my theory, that these tubes could fit in the wine bottles and be used to send messages or other things. Watson finds, buried, crumpled in one of the waste glass containers, a note, a short note. It says in Italian, I believe it says in Italian, it says, "For the misery you have brought upon us, you will pay dearly." And signed A. "For the misery you have brought upon us, you will pay dearly," signed A. We're going to hear more about some history this guy who's dead has with people. It's in Italian, actually. We talked about the translation seems proper, although maybe the chat can tell me if you think there's something more subtle about the Italian original version. Then Watson notices that there's a door that goes straight to the foundry. Our local detective here says it's secured from the inside, so don't worry about it. But we say, no, we're going to take a look. We walk through and we're confronted immediately by a worker at the foundry. So the idea is that the glass blower has rented some space at this foundry for his furnace, but they're doing other stuff in there. We get a strange comment from the worker. He says, "You're not the guy who works here, and it's not safe here. And I told the guy that works here, and he said nothing. He didn't say nothing." Rude. It's a weird statement to make. What do you mean he didn't say nothing? It almost feels like they're saying he doesn't speak. But anyway. Then we start to get into the history of Breccia and what he does. And then there's an admission that he's a spy. We get a little bit of his background and why he's got connections to wealthy families and underworld figures and anarchists, powerful Italian families, maybe mafia, unsavory activities. So they're using this guy as a conduit between the government and these underworld figures. Then we get a little bit of background on what he's been doing recently. And we get told 2 things. First of all, he recently informed the government with information that led to the arrest of an anarchist, maybe an anarchist group, that was caught with explosives. So it's possible the red paint and the threatening note was this group just threatening him. But then more recently, he contacted this agent, who's also his friend, and said, I've got valuable information about a colonial power in Africa 3 weeks ago from a contact named K. And they were supposed to meet yesterday, where our guy Breccia, our victim, was going to pass on information. And this agent here tells us they had an arrangement. If he couldn't show up and couldn't pass him information, he would get it to him through some other secure manner. And our guy here says, I didn't get anything, so I don't know how he's going to get me, how he was planning to get me information. But he did send me a telegram. The telegram is in Italian, and we don't get it translated for some reason. However, we did translate it on our own, and it said something like this. Think aged, but not wine. Aged, but only in English. Ask Antonio S. with his aged, the number 294. Strange. And that's this in Italian. Watson asked this guy, and it says, why is it saying only in English? And there was a theory in the channel about, yes, I didn't write that down. So there was an interesting theory in the channel, an actual very perceptive observation. And the observation was with regard to aged only in English. And the theory in the channel was A, G, E, D are common musical notes. Not all the whole common notes, but 4 of them. So the idea was, is this A, G, E, D related to our musical notes objects, or is that purely a red herring? Very interesting theory, though. It would make sense of the aged in English. Why would that happen? Of course, we're translating invecchiato as aged in caps. And it is strange that he keeps repeating it. Okay, and then our contact says, hey, this guy did just send me a case of wine because we both have our birthday on the same day. He doesn't seem to think that that's possibly how a message is being conveyed to him, but we do. He doesn't go into it. He does say, I am going to go check on the wine merchants of those boxes you just found, so I suspect that's what we'll get in today's letter a little bit. And then they go to a tavern, they have some coffee, and we get told a little bit more about the background of our victim. He was in the military from a small town, a small island of Murano, famous for its glass, and he apprenticed before he went into the army about glass blowing, and he's come out, and that's what he wanted to do with his life. And then he got discovered. He had a shop here blowing glass as his occupation. He got discovered, and now he's showing off his work in a very famous museum. And everyone is interested in his glass work. Maybe it's possible that our case looks like spy revenge, but is really someone else related to his glass blowing. Don't know. And that's our little recap. All right, let's check in with the chat. Is there anything I missed? Anything we should talk about before we get into it? Autumn and Cody are here. Autumn and Cody are thinking of starting their own YouTube channel. You guys should feel free to always talk about any projects you're working on, creative projects, business projects. Marco says, the musical notes in Italian are different, and AGED translate to La Sol Mi Do. Relevance is not clear yet. Okay. The musical notes in Italian are different. So you're saying they wouldn't call them AGED, so that would lend further credence to why he would be saying it's the word AGED, but in English. Although it is odd that you would write aged in Italian if you didn't want them to use the acronym AGED. Okay, D says, there is a gap between when he finished his apprenticeship and joining the military, how he rose quickly from the ranks when he was in the military, passers-by who discovered him. Yeah, I mean, it's too early for us to put any weight on that. If I had to guess, I would guess we're just hearing a little bit more about his life, but who knows? All right. If there's nothing else, we will open up today's letter and get started. All right. Letter number 2. Feels particularly thick. Maybe we'll read it first in its native form before I start filing it away. Got my new letter opener. Autumn says, we're definitely doing a channel. We rented a studio space, are almost done with setup. We'll go live in July. We'll be playing the third Seven Citadel Curse as our first live stream. Wow, rented a studio space, almost done with the setup. I thought at some point about renting space. I live in a 1,300 square foot condo, and I've gone to some great lengths to put up a little mini studio in my office. I made a whole video series about how to set up a micro board game filming studio. I don't know if Autumn and Cody have watched that video, but I do talk about a lot of things in addition to camera and lighting and sound, setting up the space. I have thought about, and Greg and I at some point talked about, would it make sense to rent a little studio space? It is a little inconvenient to film here. For one reason, the heat. For the other reason, the noise. If my wife is sleeping overnight when I'm recording. But the real obstacle, in addition to the cost, which I don't want to think about, is that any extra effort to leave the house to go somewhere, that puts a burden that would make me not want to do any filming. All right, let's see. Autumn did watch the videos. All right, so here we go. We've got 4 letters on a different paper stock. Sorry, 3 letters, 3 double-sided letters. These are from Enrico Prosali, the ambassador. All right. 3rd of August, 1894. Dear Mr. Holmes, it was most exhilarating to once again have the company of Dr. Watson. Despite being a man of Italy, I know much of your work and am honored to be carrying out this investigation at your behest. You will be pleased to know that I have made significant progress in my pursuit of information regarding Alfonso's death. In the last 48 hours, this is not the Italian ambassador, it's the guy that we talked to, Prosali, the agent, and the friend of the victim who works for the Italian ambassador. You will be pleased to know I have made significant progress in my pursuit of information regarding Alfonso's death. In the last 48 hours, I have traversed the streets of London tirelessly, and am eager to share all I have learned. In order of occurrence rather than significance, I have paid a solemn, eventful visit to Alfonso's home, former home, I suppose, as well as to his shop. In both of these instances, I encountered the man working at the Phoenix Brass Foundry. I have also spoken with one of the wine merchants listed on the cases found in the shop, and most recently I located and questioned the operator who dispatched Alfonso's last telegram to me. I will start with my inspection of 3 St. John Street, Clerkenwell, Alfonso's home. I arrived at the address yesterday morning close to 7 a.m. The house is one of a red-bricked 3-storied terrace. It belonged not to Alfonso, but to the embassy. Thus I was able to secure a spare key from my associates and let myself in, as if I resided there myself. Walking up the steps to the front door, I found myself overcome by a profound sadness. The house was in good repair, as I recalled it being 5 weeks ago when my wife and I shared dinner with Alfonso. although it did bear the usual hallmarks of his creative nature. Everything could be considered tidy if one adheres to the most technical sense of the word. There was no trash strewn about, nor was there anything out of place, but rather the sheer amount of objects makes the home feel a mess, in spite of any organization. Glass ornaments, most if not all made by Alfonso, line the bookshelves, of which there are 3 large ones, each packed tightly with literature. The walls are covered in artwork collected by Alfonso, some of which was created by his acquaintances. Cabinets throughout the house are stuffed with books, old garments, and countless musical trinkets, instruments, and components. The only things I observed that felt out of place were a mackintosh and a greatcoat that had been tossed over the newel post at the bottom of the stairs, and the cushions on the red velvet sofa, which had been left at a jaunty angle. Interesting. Okay, a mackintosh is a kind of coat or something. Someone can fill us in the chat. And something odd about the cushions on the sofa. I did notice 2 gaps in one of his bookcases. The one adjacent to the house's entrance, containing mostly books related to music. This, however, I could not deem unusual, as I quickly thereafter came upon a pair of tomes on his desk which fit quite nicely into the gaps in question. These related to Alfonso's interest in the physical properties of sound. One of the 2 concerned specifically the resonance of glass. This seems to lend more credence to the idea that that message was about musical notes. Okay, the resonance of glass he's investigating. Continuing, there was nothing hidden, markings or otherwise, within its pages, though I was drawn to a picture and description of an unusual musical device. The ingenious instrument, referred to as a glass harmonica, consists of a series of fine glass bowls, each smaller than the last, which are arranged in a linear fashion. They are then affixed to a rotating shaft so that one may move them by foot treadle. As the bowls turn, the player can produce music by skillfully caressing their edges with moistened fingers. So this is the common thing of people who can play glasses. They fill them up with different amounts of water and they move their fingers around it to create a sound. And the glass harmonica is an arrangement of those types of things on like a lazy Susan that they can spin around so they can access them, all different ones, without moving. It was as I read about this technique that I realized a page of music had been left beneath the book in my hands. Adagio was written in pencil atop the sheet, and below this was printed 1791 W.A. Mozart. So Adagio is a style, a speed. It tells you how to read the music, how fast to play it, but someone can add some more context to that in the channel, perhaps. Also surprised me to see the arrangement was intended for the glass harmonica. I know well that Alfonso was an accomplished musician, and I often heard him play his beloved Stradivarius, a violin and a family heirloom. I witnessed him playing a variety of instruments, some of which I would be unable to even name. Yet I'm confident I never saw him playing music with glass bowls. I never heard of such an apparatus until this morning. Indeed, I spent additional time at Alfonso's home merely in hopes of uncovering one. Alas, I do not believe he owned anything similar. Beyond his piano, the many guitars and violins, nearly all in need of repair, and the series of drums about the house, there was nothing to be found. I figure that music for the glass harmonica can be played on a violin all the same, as Alfonso's Stradivarius was resting to one side, within its open case, some feet from the Adagio score and the 2 books. Some feet, I guess that just means some pages of music from the Adagio score. Once I recorded my observations, I performed a brief inspection of the bureau itself, wherein I unearthed some information possibly of use. A journal was in the uppermost cabinet, and a red silken ribbon had been placed to mark the page for Wednesday, 1st of August. There were 2 entries for that date. The first was simply a reminder to order more cigars from Carlin's, but the second was of more interest. It read, "Meet with K, discuss commission." I detected no other entries referring to K, but I did jot down a number of names from a list near the back of the journal. It was a rather lengthy list titled CS, consisting of names followed by a letter and a number, which were all ordered by month and year. The list started in February of 1892 and continued 4 pages of neatly scrawled names. For the sake of simplicity, I took note of those listed after the date of January 1894, of which there were only 4. Each was followed by a letter and a number. Okay, there's the date, the person, letter, and number. All R's, though. R2, R5, R9, and R10. The rest of Alfonso's house looked as if he had left for work on an ordinary day. Nothing amiss or of further interest, so I left for the embassy, only to find myself facing an unexpected visitor outside. Alfred Grimes, the man who works adjacent to Alfonso at the foundry, was shuffling toward the house as I exited. "Seen him, have ya?" were the words he barked at me. "Who?" I said. "That German fella. Walks like he's got something wrong with his leg." I told Grimes that I had seen nobody, and he said, "Caught him peeping into the shop earlier. Tried the door, then he often left when it wouldn't budge. So I chased after him, and ends up here, don't he? Ran off when he noticed me tailing him. You know, I seen that bloke with Breccia once. Looks like he's sniffing round his stuff now that he's gone." Grimes stopped to take a breath, then finished. "But looks like he's been scared off, so I'm back to work." On hearing this, I determined to immediately pay Alfonso's shop another visit, for even if I discovered nothing new, I was curious as to anything further Grimes might be able to share. My visit to the shop, now simply the foundry, was itself uneventful. However, one detail has made me anxious. All right, before we move on, let's just look at this again. All right, so it's a list titled CS. Well, why don't we read it all, and then I'll go mark it up later. So we go back to the shop, and one detail makes me anxious. He says, "You may recall that when I met Dr. Watson at the site, he observed a case containing the shattered fragments of dark green ampules. We could presume they were the shards of broken ampules because there were a number of ampules within the case that were still intact, and therein lies my anxiety. When I visited yesterday, there were none at all intact. I searched through the case carefully, and all the green glass I found was shattered to bits. Not only that, but there were plenty of larger shards of glass, perhaps the size of half an ampule, when we first searched the case, yet on this occasion it was filled with truly diminutive bits. The remainder of Alfonso's shop looked as it did when his body was discovered, as far as I can recall, and Grimes all but threatened me when I suggested somebody might have snuck inside. "You think I'm some sleeping beaut, eh? Wouldn't notice a bloke breaking in? No one's been around till today when I spotted that fellow with the dodgy leg, and he didn't come inside. I'm nearly always here, and my locks and latches do a right good job when I'm not." Noting his temperament, I altered my course and instead asked what he knew of the ampules. This too failed to elicit a productive response. "Ampules? I don't keep watch over the man's precious glass birds and flowers. How am I to know what they're for? Maybe someone wanted a bit of the jungle in their parlor, so he made him some monkeys and parrots and ampules." I figured it would be in my best interest to thank Grimes and dismiss him, rather than inform him an ampule was not, in fact, a beast of the jungle. After all, we too are ignorant as to the purpose of these ampules. Following this, I took a little lunch at the Apple Tree, whose owner is married to an Italian lass from Naples. The fare on offer always includes some hearty Italian dishes. Today's specials from La Cuncia Casarecchia was tagliatelle and beef stew, a classic Neapolitan dish. Cannot help but quell my stomach with a portion, and of course a glass of red wine. When the waitress appeared, I also asked, "Tell me, did Signor Breccia, the glassmaker from the shop down the street, eat here often?" She said. "He was not here often, but I recall him. He seemed to be lonely. Some of the local boys made a habit of teasing him." About to take another bite, I paused to ask, "How so?" The girl thought for a moment. "He would often leave his shop and berate them for playing loud games outside or for pulling faces at him. Sometimes they would see him frustrated with his work and would bang on the metal doors in front of his shop window just to vex him. I think he caught one of them throwing something at his shop a few days ago. He was angrily shouting at the boy just as I walked past." Okay, maybe that was the red paint. I noted this, thanked the girl, and drained the last of my wine. Feeling replete, my thoughts then focused on my impending visit to the merchants named on the cases in Alfonso's shop. One of the two, El Fratelli, was familiar to me, as it had been stenciled upon the case of exquisite Barolo wine that Alfonso sent me on my last birthday. Hence, it is towards his store that I walked. I have been a dear fan of Luigi Fratelli's wines since receiving them from Alfonso, who informed me then of their provenance, a shop operated by Fratelli himself, a mere pair of minutes from the Apple Tree. As I approached the mullion-windowed facade adorned with Italian wines, I could think of nothing but the cryptic telegram I'd received just days ago. After endless hours of contemplation, I had no answers, yet my mind was fixated on the message. Who is Antonio? I thought to myself, stepping through the wine merchant's doors. Inside, a jolly man of middle years waved at me from behind the counter. He was wearing working clothes and a tattered apron, once brown perhaps, now gray, with 3 large pockets tied at the waist. He greeted me, smiling, in a shrill voice. "Good afternoon, sir." In return, I answered, "Good afternoon. I'd like to speak with Antonio, please." The merchant's eyes narrowed, and he replied, "I'm sorry, sir. We don't have working here a person of that name." I paused before introducing myself in Italian. "Apologies, then it's my mistake. My name is Enrico Frosali. I'm a representative of the Italian embassy. A friend of mine was kind enough to send me a case of fine Barolo, and I wanted to purchase another as a gift. His name was Signor Alfonso Breccia. Perhaps you know him." He mentioned Antonio and number 294 when I asked him about the wine. Does 294 refer to the vineyard? Perhaps the Barolo is a varietal? The merchant laughed and shook his head. "Ah, ha, ha, ha. Il Real del Vini. No, I'm afraid it is not, nor am I familiar with any vineyard referred to by the number 294. But yes, of course I recall Signor Alfonso." I thought then to further my inquiry by asking, "I walked past Signor Breccia's shop this morning. There was a large splash of red paint across the shop window. Do you know what happened?" "No, signor, but I have heard talk of it from my clients." Fratelli lowered his voice to a hush, asking, "You say you're a friend of Signor Breccia?" I nodded as he continued, "Well, then, please, you must give him a message for me. Tell him, please, signor, to be most careful. The Vincenza family seems to have some sort of disagreement with Signor Breccia." The merchant paused and looked around the room before adding, "Arturo Vincenza, head of the family, he's a violent man. And there are rumors of a meeting between Signor Breccia and Sofia Vincenza. Signor Vincenzo's daughter. Apparently, their rendezvous did not end well for either party. The winemaker then raised an eyebrow, inclined his head, and slowly nodded. It took me some moments to digest his inference. Alfonso may very well have been expecting a child. As the man had nothing further to say on the matter, I placed the order for a further case of the Barolo and asked for the address of the Vincenza family. This he provided. I then asked for information regarding the second wine merchant, C. Lombardi. Upon stating the name, Fratelli chuckled, saying, "Carlo Lombardi, friend of mine. We're competitors, but he's passionate. He's a passionate Italian and a good man. You'll see. His shop's not far, though he has been away on family business, I think. Since the 1st of August, at least. There was a note on his shop window when I walked past on Wednesday, stating his shop would open once again on the 10th of August. I took note of Lombardi's address, shook hands with Signor Fratelli, and set off to the Vincenza family house, one of 2 final destinations on this day. The address led me to Turnmill Street, a place, it would seem, that had in years past been named Cutthroat Alley. Stepping down from my cab, I looked to a terrace of houses, each 3 stories and made from that famous London brick. All of the windows had above them a fan of contrasting yellow bricks, and the front doors led directly onto the pavement. It took me but a few moments to locate the Vincenza family at number 7. I knocked soundly upon the peeling red paint of their door, and in no more than 30 seconds the door was roughly opened by a man who looked like a common pugilist. His head was shaven, and he stood something over 6 feet in height, dressed in a stained flannel vest and a pair of trousers that were tied at the waist with a coarse string. He looked me up and down before demanding, "What do you want?" I touched my hat, saying, "Good morning, Signor Vincenza." He took half a step towards me. "And what business might you have with me?" I had the impression that this was meant to intimidate me, but I stood motionless, saying, "I am Inspector Forsali. I am here as a representative of the Italian embassy. I'm here because I understand you have had a dispute with Alfonso Breccia. I'd like to talk to you about your relationship with him." Vincenza glowered at me, shouting, "Relationship, ha! So now he's involved the embassy, a coward." My face grew stern, and I confessed to losing my temper as I replied, "Not so. The man was no coward. He died a true patriot. Now, do you wish me to return with a constable by my side?" Vincenza poked his head outside the front door, spat on the pavement beside my foot, and then growled, "Come in if you must." As we strode down the passageway inside, he shouted, "Louisa, shut the door." The man then led me around a corner and through a doorway into a poorly furnished room I presume was their sitting room. Upon the floor was a rug made from knotted rags, laid upon bare wooden floorboards. Ochre-stained wallpaper, peeled at its edges, and tired-looking furniture was entirely mismatched. Vincenza pointed brusquely toward a stool before he swept a thin tortoise-shell cat from a pine chair that was directly opposite it. It was clear that the man's anger towards Alfonso was unaffected by news of his death. He sneered, "How did he die?" I pursed my lips before replying, "He was beaten and tortured in his shop." The man before me seemed unmoved by these details. He shrugged and remarked, "I would have gladly fulfilled the task of dispatching him myself. I told him to keep away from Sophia, yet he could not refrain. And now look at her." Vincenza was silent for a moment before adding, "He lured my Sophia in. Made us think I would have a son-in-law. That bastard thought she wouldn't find out he was married." I questioned him, for Alfonso had no wives of which I knew. "How did your daughter learn this?" Vincenza, red with rage, shook his head. Sophia told me that she had met him some months ago. She works in a shop only a few minutes away. Breccia had been a regular patron, and they became acquainted. Weeks passed. I never noticed anything. Suddenly, they had become great friends. He stopped before striking the arms of his chair. She told me he was going to see her aunt, but it was a lie. He convinced her to lie and to sneak away to his house on St. John Street. He fell silent for a few seconds, quietly seething. 3 weeks ago, she tells my wife she's with child, that Alfonso Breccia is the father. She knew better than to tell me. Then, last week, my wife convinces Sophia to surprise the man and confront him in the street. And that's when she saw him wearing a wedding ring. She just ran. She swore to us she would never set eyes upon him again. I sighed, knowing of Breccia's wedding ring. I explained. The ring that she saw belonged to Breccia's father. He wore it in his honor, as if it were his own. I paused before asking, were you responsible for the red paint? Was it you who threw that against his shop window? Again, Vincenzo laughed and shook his head. Ha! No, your friend was not always so popular in these parts, always poking his nose into other people's affairs. Vincenzo now seemed sullen, saying, you must look elsewhere for your answers, Inspector. I will say no more. With a nod, I looked toward the man before stating, this business remains unresolved, but answers, I assure you, will be found. Rising from the chair, and without a backward glance, I left the house. My next destination, the post office, where I hoped to learn more of Alfonso's last telegram to me. Translated into English, it reads, think of the aged, but not of the wine. Aged only in English. Inquire of Antonio S. with his aged, the number 294. The only sort of oddity is the fact that the word invecchiato, aged in English, was written using capital letters. And as I've already written, I know not what to make of this. Therefore, my objective was to learn more of how and when Alfonso might have arranged to have this telegram sent to me. Knowing it had been dispatched from the General Post Office, I made my way to St. Martin's le Grand and introduced myself to the chief clerk. They promptly confirmed that the staff present today was undoubtedly the same group that was working when I received Alfonso's telegram, as the GPO has been direly in need of staff. Within minutes, I was directed to a clerk who recognized my friend on hearing his name. Yes, Mr. Breccia, said the clerk. He was here earlier this week. How could I forget? He refused to provide me with his message, insisted on personally dictating it to an operator. I didn't argue, though. Can't be bothered. Took him right over to Henry, unless I'm mistaken. The clerk directed me towards Henry Kelly, one of the telegram operators. Mr. Kelly described Alfonso as nervous or in a hurry, or both, on the day he delivered the telegram, 31st of July. Nevertheless, he says that Mr. Breccia spoke slowly and carefully when he told me what to write down. He was very particular. Said he'd be willing to pay the telegram boy to wait and be sure the message was handed directly to the right fellow. Then he rushed off. This telegram boy, Clarence Stevens, was expected back at the post office within the half hour, so I waited for him outside the entrance after concluding my interview with Kelly. Young Clarence was eager to be involved in real detective work, as he phrased it, and unknowingly provided me with an invaluable nugget of information. When questioned, he snickered. Before confessing, he accepted a small fee for Alfonso's special deliveries that day. This, of course, prompted me to ask for clarity. There was only one delivery, no? He shook his head. No, the Italian man asked me to deliver 2 telegrams. I brought one to you and the other to an old man at a church in Finsbury. It's called South Place Chapel. Within the hour, I found my way over to Finsbury and located this chapel. And Mr. Holmes, I'm unsure of how to approach this development. Based on the large notices I spotted on my arrival, the South Place Chapel planned to host a series of lectures exposing the brutal tactics being used against the Herero people this coming week. Small amendments to the notices indicate the lectures have been postponed, but they are to be delivered by special guests Chief Samuel Maharero of Southwest Africa and Dr. Carl Vetter, devout missionary and expert in anthropology. I've not spoken with any representatives of the chapel. The door was shut today and nobody responded to my knocks. But unless you say otherwise, I will make it my duty to do so by tomorrow evening. We must learn more about this other telegram, especially considering the special guests listed on the advertisements. A brief bit of research tells me Dr. Vetter is renowned for having lived amongst the Herero people, and more notably for being critical of colonial practices. This calls my attention in light of Alfonso's recent remarks about new intelligence concerning colonial powers in Africa. Still, I doubt Alfonso was in contact with either of these special guests. I wondered if instead his contact might have been somebody at the South Place Chapel. Naturally, I will attempt to learn more about those named in Alfonso's journal, and I will write to you once I have heard from Lombardi or anybody from the chapel. I look forward to any guidance you may be able to offer, and am especially curious as to your interpretation of Vincenzo's statements. I remain, meanwhile, yours sincerely, Enzio Rosali. Not Enzio. What's his name? Enrico Rosali. Okay, let's file these away, and then we'll talk about anything we noticed. Maybe make any markup. I mean, I noticed a couple of things there. Let's see what the chat says. Macintosh is a raincoat made of rubberized material. They were made illegal. It's an actual instrument. What was made illegal? Antonio Stradivari is our Antonio S. Antonio Stradivari. So you're saying the violin is the famous violin Stradivarius. That's Antonio S. Southwest Africa was a German colony. Today's Namibia, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, I'm not sure about all that, but let's go back and skim through and make our markings here. All right, so we visit Alfonso's house. It's neat and orderly. No one has searched through it. It hasn't been tossed by anyone searching for stuff. But he's got lots of musical instruments he plays. We've got our Macintosh raincoat and cushions that look like maybe they're disturbed for some reason or maybe not. He sees 2 gaps in the bookcase, but then he finds the books that he thinks are from there. So it's just recently that he's reading these books. And the books are on the resonance of glass. All right. And then we see the books are about the glass harmonica, which we saw those musical glass tuning forks might be used to make. That certainly looks like he's planning on making one of these. He doesn't find one in the house, though. He does find a page of music labeled Adagio by Mozart. and it's made to be played on a glass harmonica. We're told that Alfonso has never been seen playing a glass harmonica, but he is good at playing the violin. He has a Stradivarius. And this guy says you could play this music on a violin. And Marco is saying that the maker, Stradivarius, his full name was Antonio. So that might match with the letter that says Antonio S. We're going to get to that again later. Let's see. Okay. Now, we find a journal from the 1st of August, which is when our case starts, when he was killed. Okay. So, a red silken ribbon and placed to mark the page for Wednesday, the 1st of August. So that's our day he died. He's got a marker there. 2 entries. Meet with K, discuss the commission, and the other one was get more cigars from Carwin's. Maybe because he's going to give out cigars. Anyway, no other entries, but there's a list at the back of the book titled CS. Confidential sources, maybe? Not clear. It's an old list, but he looks at ones from this year. There's only 4 from this year, and here they are. So the most recent one is from the last month, Heinrich Bauer. Okay, as we're leaving, the worker at the foundry has showed up. And he says, you saw him, huh? And we say, no, who you're talking about? And he says, it's the German fella that walks like he's got something wrong with his leg. This is Grimes we're meeting. And we say, I didn't see anyone like that. And he says, I caught him looking in the shop. He tried the door and then he went off. When it wouldn't open, this guy decides to follow him. And he says, yeah, he's sniffing around this guy. But when he saw me following him, he ran off. Grimes stopped to take a breath and finish. It looks like he's been scared off. Now, I didn't think anything of I saw this, but now that I reread it, I have a slightly different take on it. Remember, we're dealing with some accomplished spies. It's awfully convenient for this guy, Grimes. We walk out our door, we see Grimes. And when we spot him, he's quick on his feet. He said, you see him? And we say, what are you talking about? I don't see anyone. And he says, yeah, there was a guy. I was following him to this house. He was trying to sneak in. He was sneaking, looking in the shop. But isn't an alternative interpretation is we've caught Grimes planning to sneak in. And he's come up with a very convincing excuse for why he was seen outside this door, that he's following someone else. It is very odd that Grimes would just take it on himself to follow someone. So I'm going to put a little note here asking if this is a lie. Did anyone else have that interpretation? Didn't occur to me when we first read it, but now it feels to me like it's awfully convenient for this guy who runs the foundry to be following someone. Very odd. So I'm suspicious now of Grimes. Why is he getting involved? Why is he involving himself in this? Seems very unlikely. Okay, now we return to he goes back to the shop, and the full green ampules that we found are no longer there, or they've been broken. Not clear if someone took them or broke them. We talked to Grimes, and he pretty convincingly comes up with this thing about saying, I don't even know what you're talking about, but no one got in, he says. My locks will keep everyone in. Well, someone obviously got in. Either him or someone. But, yeah. Okay, then we get some wine. We ask if our guy ever comes in here. She says he has some trouble with the locals who make fun of him. They bang on the metal doors, and he caught them throwing something at his shop. This sounds like where the red paint comes from, so totally not related to our case, it sounds like. And then this guy goes off to the wine merchant. He goes to the wine merchant, and we ask about Antonio because our note said S. Antonio. It said ask S. Antonio, which we now think, thanks to Marco, is Antonio Stradivarius, perhaps. This guy doesn't want to tell us that he's our guy, but eventually does admit it, right? Or we ask about Antonio, he says there's no one there with that name. And then we introduce ourselves, and he knows, right? He doesn't know Antonio, because that's not the name of a person, but it is the wine merchant. Okay. And we ask him, maybe the number 294 means something to you. It's always he's all talking about this note that we found about the aged wine, ask Antonio S. and 294. But he doesn't know any of that. He says it's not going to be from a vineyard. I don't know anything about the red paint. But people talked about it. And then he gives us some background about someone who's mad at our victim, Arturo Vicenza, getting the daughter of this scary family guy killed, although the scary family guy is obviously poor, living in a poor house. But okay. We order the wine, we move along, nothing to be learned. We ask about the other wine merchant, and he says he's out of town. He's been out of town since the 1st of August at least. I mean, that's our murder date. So he just left town on the date our guy got murdered, it seems. He's going to be back the 10th of August, though. Okay, we get the address, and then we go to visit the broken down, dangerous house of Vicenza family, who's a little intimidating and admits that he hates Alfonso Breccia. He says, I would have killed him. And he tells us why, because he took advantage of the daughter. He asks how he died. We told him, and he says, we tell him how he was killed. And our guy explains that they're so angry because they found out he was married. We ask for details, and it turns out it's a total misunderstanding. She thought he was married because she saw the wedding ring on his finger. We explain, because we're good friends with him, that he's not married, it's just his father's. Now we ask if he threw the red paint. He says no. All right, now before we go to the telegram, I want to note, we saw his fingers cut off, right? We didn't see any wedding ring. Is there a reason why? Did they cut off his finger not to torture him, but to get the ring? No, because they cut 2 fingers, right? So I don't think it has anything to do with the wedding ring. Okay, then he goes to check out the, I'm going to check in with the channel in a second, but he goes to check out the telegram. And here's a repeat of the note. Antonio S., which Marco has told us is, and that matches Antonio Stradivarius, which I think is very, seems right. With his age, the number 294. So we don't know what 294 would be in reference to the violin or the piece of music. And he talks a little bit about that, but all stuff we've already noted and written down. All right, so we go to the telegram office and we get told that he didn't want to give his message. He insisted on personally dictating it to an operator. Probably because the spelling, the caps, all that has to be exactly the way he wants it. So I think that's the explanation of why he can't trust this guy to pass it on. He needs it sent right away and in a very particular form. And he says he was nervous or in a hurry. And it was sent the day before he died. And he wants it sent right away. He wants to make sure it's delivered, handed directly. Can't afford anyone to intercept it. So they bring the delivery kid. Delivery kid got a tip, and he said, yeah, I delivered his messages. And we say, what do you mean messages? There was more than one? He says, yeah, there was 2 that were sent on this same day right before he was killed. South Place Chapel. An old man at a church. Old man got delivered it. Hand delivered. Remember, he said he wanted to determine exactly who gets it. So here's the old man at the church gets the other telegram. We go over, this guy goes over, and he sees lectures about the Herero people, which we're told is an African colony. And then we get Dr. Carl Vetter, who's a K. Remember, he's got an informant named K, devout missionary, and Samuel Maher. No one's there. Dr. Vetter, K. Vetter, is renowned for having lived amongst the Herero people, being critical of the British colonial system, which is important for us because we think that's what he has information to share. But our guy says, I don't think he's talking to these guys because they're special guests. They're not even in town yet. So maybe it's someone who works at the chapel. And that's it. All right, let's talk. Let's see what the chat has come up with. Could the messages be put in cigars? That would be easier. CS is the initials of the telegram boy. Yeah, but he's just met the telegram boy today, whereas this list labeled CS is years old. The year he moved to England, 1982. Yeah. Okay. This seems like they might be in confidential informants, confidential sources is what I think. And maybe when he met them and what number he's referring to them, what code number he uses to refer to them. That would be my guess, but surely just a wild hypothesis at this point. R2, R5, R9, and 10. Well, this would go against the idea that he's using these as code names to refer to them, because why would he be skipping? He skipped 3 to get to R5, 4 to get to R9, and 1 to get to R10. On what basis is he using those, coming up with those numbers? Don't know. So it looks like Vincenza is just a little red herring. He doesn't seem like, to me, like he's involved in any of this. He's a regular of her shop. We don't know what her shop is. They got pregnant. She told me she was going to see an aunt, but it was a lie. They snuck away to his house, and she got pregnant. They're gonna go surprise him. She just saw him wearing a wedding ring. That's all. She doesn't see him with another girl, just the wedding ring. Seems like a total red herring. The part that I'm most curious about is the broken ampules. I mean, I feel like the old man at the church, we're either going to get their names soon or not. I'm not sure what we can intuit about that. But the part about Grimes claiming he was following someone, a German guy with a bad leg, this feels like a lie to me. I think that I would be very happy if this was a lie. I would be very happy that I caught that he was lying. This is a great element to include in a mystery game where someone tells you something. Normally we just accept those as given. Accept the witness statement as true, accept what the person says as true, unless it's like questioning them about a murder or something. But his quick volunteering of this seems very fishy to me. And then this is a little weird, hard to wrap my head around. So he says, remember there were these full, large ampules, delicate ampules there. He says, but now I go there was none that were intact. But he's kind of squirrely about the fact whether he thinks there are new broken pieces. He says, all the green glass I found was shattered to bits. Plenty of larger shards when we were first there, and now they're all smashed up. So it does sound like, okay, this little part here sounds like someone went in there and smashed them up rather than stole them. Okay, then we talk to Grimes again. Let me see what he says and see if it sounds more suspicious. We say, I think someone snuck in and smashed the stuff up. And he says, I'm always here. No one snuck in. When I'm not here, my locks keep people from breaking in. And he's pretty convincingly playing dumb. But it could be him just playing dumb. Depends how clever this guy is putting on an act. Not sure I have any more insight. Let's see what the channel has any other thoughts. Okay, so Marco is giving us some musical background here. Fundamental frequencies of violin strings, G, D, A, and E. So A is violin string frequencies. If he's right-handed, he will be using his left hand on finger positioning, maybe related to why first and third of his fingers are removed. I don't buy it. But Marco says, look at that 294 hertz frequency of D. That matches our 294. Rob says, maybe 294 hertz breaks some specific glass. For the glass to shatter, the sound must match the glass's natural resonant frequency. This is a very interesting theory. AGED, and then he says 294. So you could imagine. So one theory is that our guy is researching if you could use a musical instrument to purposefully break glass on a specific kind of glass. So you could imagine this would be a way to trigger an explosion or poison someone by crafting an ampule filled with poison or explosives, an ampule that's very delicately designed to shatter if it hears a certain frequency. Or maybe you could even set up a sequence, like multiple ampules that trigger on different frequencies. And so an attacker could play that certain frequency, play a certain music, and it would break the ampule and trigger the poison release or the explosion. And so either our guy was trying to construct that, or more likely our guy was researching whether it would work, or maybe he was hired to create such a thing. It's pretty convoluted, but it's also a pretty cool idea. That you've got a weapon, a poison that you can deploy. Nowadays, you plant a cell phone, you do a radio transmitter that you could use to trigger the explosion or the poison release. But you could imagine in the 1800s, you don't have any of that, but you could trigger glass to shatter containing some poison or gas or explosion and trigger it with music. It's pretty little far-fetched, but pretty cool idea. Sleeping Dragon says they actually did that in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie. Really? That is interesting. All right, well, we've been here for an hour and 15 minutes. It's a very interesting case, but I think we've probably exhausted what we can chew on until our next letter. Really good work in the audience, especially Marco with the Stradivarius and musical note 294 stuff. And it absolutely makes sense that he's not actually building a glass harmonica, but he's examining how you would build these ampules to trigger at certain frequencies and break. And maybe even maybe that's the answer to no one broke in. So Grimes says no one broke in. The locks would prevent anyone from breaking in. And maybe that's true. Maybe someone could trigger those ampules to break by playing the music. Maybe that's the answer for how those green ampules that were in one piece when we left got broken. Yeah, I like that idea. Let's just make a little note here. Detonated by sound. Question mark. Pretty clever. Okay. We've come up with some interesting theories here. All right, we're going to sign off now. As a reminder, if you want to discuss this case, you could post comments on the YouTube video, though YouTube has recently redone the layouts to make life miserable for people who want to comment on videos. I'm very angry about it. I don't know what else to do. But we do have a Discord for this channel, and we have a Board Game Geek forum for this channel. There are links to both on this YouTube page, on the more in the about or whatever. There's a channel on the Discord for discussing Dear Holmes cases and recent cases. You are welcome to come join us and talk about the case if you have any other theories, or post on the Board Game Geek Guild for this channel. Thank you as always for joining me. Now, next week I will be away. Next week, is that true? That's not true. Never mind. We'll have our Sunday Dear Holmes as usual on this coming Sunday. I'll be away for the weekdays, but not the weekends. So I will be here for that. All right. I'll see you next week.